Good afternoon and welcome everybody, and thank you for joining us in our long-term care virtual webinar. We appreciate you joining us today and look forward to diving into long-term care a little bit in more detail. My name is Joe Yates. I'm the insurance advisor for Community America. I work with our members and our financial advisors on creating long-term care solutions for you. Today, I'm joined by Rich Kopetsky, who specializes in long-term care planning. As we move through the webinar, if you have any questions, please go ahead and type those into the chat box, and we'll do our best to answer those at the end. Without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to Rich.
Hey, thanks so much, Joe, and welcome everybody to our educational seminar on planning for long-term care, why it's an important part of retirement planning. Also a little bit of a housekeeping, as Joe mentioned. If you don't mind muting your phones, if you joined via the computer and have the audio through the computer, you should be muted, but if you can mute, that'd be great. And as Joe mentioned, there's a little chat function up top if you're joining us via your computer that you can chat in questions, towards the close of the educational workshop. So as you can see through my picture, I haven't grown much hair over the years. That picture is probably a good 5 years old, but I guess that's good. We're all aging and maturing, and that's an important part that we're going to really speak about today. So Katie, next slide, please, and really get into our agenda for today. As follows: you are most likely going to live a long life. I think we all agree with that. We're living much, much longer than we have in the past. Who is most impacted by an extended care event, or as we call long-term care? Also, what pays for your care? We'll talk about the different options on what pays for your care inside and outside your own home. Also, a different view of your retirement plan as it relates to long-term care. This is probably something new that you have not heard about that we'll discuss. Also, starting to think about a plan that provides for your care, your family, and how it will be paid for, and what will protect that plan. We'll talk about those options. Next slide, Katie. Thank you. So here's really the genesis of today's talk is what's your plan? Most people, as they age, have plans for retirement, and they work 30 or 40 years, and then they retire. They have a pension, or they have a 401k, or they have real estate. They have other investments that they have done over many, many years. Have they really thought about long-term care? Maybe, maybe not. As we go through this and really talk about the continuum of care, if I was able to see all of you and ask you to raise your hands if you've ever known somebody that's needed long-term care, you would 9.9 out of 10 of you would raise your hand, yes, I have known somebody. Then I would ask you to look to your left or right, and have you ever known somebody that's sitting to your left or right? And if you're joining with a spouse or a parent, you've probably known somebody close by that's needed that care. You might have been involved with caring for that person, so we'll talk about that. But the key is, what is your plan? Why living a long life requires more than good luck. Next slide, Katie. So what you do is you need to consider that living a long life may have an unexpected impact on your finances and family. And as I alluded to, for those of you that have had an experience with a loved one, either the family is always involved with caring for somebody, either emotionally, physically, or financially. And if you've had all three of those, the trifecta, where you've been involved emotionally and been involved with actually caring for a parent or a grandparent or a husband or wife or a brother or sister, it's tough, right? And we'll talk about that a little bit more, and it's important. That's why it's important to have a plan. We'll also talk about insurance as an option. It may not be appropriate. We'll talk about who it's appropriate for, but this conversation is more about having some type of plan in place, and we'll talk about those options. Next slide, Katie. So, as I like to say over the last 30 years, is reasonable people understand they're likely to live a long life. 2, understand the chances of needing care increase with age. So my grandmother lived to 94 years of age. She lived a very wonderful, fruitful life. She was the matriarch of our family on my father's side, but unfortunately, her last 8 years of her life, she suffered from Alzheimer's. And if you know about that condition, that disease, it does not, unfortunately, get better. And she progressed to the point where she needed full-time care the last several years. So to me, the only reason why she needed care is because she lived a long life. So that's the point there. And then third, are you willing to consider the risk of living a long life will have on your best thought out retirement plan? We're going to focus in on that bullet point today, meaning that if you had to self-insure the costs of long-term care, what does that look like? Next slide, Katie. So some definitions about long-term care. This is not health insurance. This is not care where you would go to your physician to have them look at your knee that needs to be operated on. If you do that, you normally have your health insurance cover that. It's called skilled medically necessary care. And the good news is most people get better from that. I've had 2 knee surgeries and have recovered from that. So long-term care is different. Long-term care is described as providing services when a person needs assistance with their activities of daily living, where somebody cannot perform that by themselves. They need assistance from somebody else. And you can see the definitions on there: dressing, eating, be able to bathe yourself, and or you suffer from a cognitive impairment, as I mentioned, Alzheimer's, dementia, and unfortunately no cure for those diseases yet. And then it requires primarily custodial care, not skilled care. Next slide, please, Katie. So long-term care impacts more than just you. It impacts your family. It's a family issue, and I cannot say that more. You're going to hear me talk about that as we go through this educational information, is that the family is always involved with caring for somebody or making decisions for that person who needs the care. Because think about it, once that person becomes incapacitated where they can't make decisions for themselves, or they physically are incapacitated where they can't take care of themselves, it's the family, spouse, adult children are very much involved. The average age of a caregiver is a 47-year-old female who is probably still working. So the family is always involved, and we'll talk about, when you have a plan, how the family is going to be involved. Next slide, Katie. So long-term care is a family issue. I spoke about that. I'm not a big statistical guy, but I think it's important to kind of understand some statistics about long-term care. And over 70% of the care is provided by families. We already know this. A lot of you may have already been through this. 67% of that is provided by children and their spouses and grandchildren. I personally have been through 2 caregiving events with grandparents because I was the closest living relative at the time. And I can share lots of stories with you, but we don't have enough time on this educational seminar. And depending upon how the family is set up, there may not be 100% agreement on how a loved one should be cared for. I'll just say that. Usually the closest living relative is or child is providing the care, and the others that live far away or maybe be supporting it. But it's a difficult issue, but I'll talk you through this, right, as we go through what the options are. Next slide. So some things to think about. Discussing the issue of getting older and needing care. It's very difficult. Many years ago, I had this conversation with my parents, and they're still relatively young compared to how old I am, in their mid to late 70s. And it was hard having that discussion with them when they were in their 60s. And they said, no, we're fine and we're healthy. Well, fast forward 15 years later, they've had some health challenges, and unfortunately, that's how it goes sometimes. So that's why we're talking about this issue. What the impact would be on you and your siblings, and we're talking about if your parents needed care or your children, right? So let's say you and your husband needed care. What type of conversation should you have with your children? We'll talk about those options and where there'll be funds to provide for that plan. So we'll talk about those options on how to pay for long-term care, whether the care is given inside your home or outside. Next slide, Katie. So what will pay for your plan? Next slide. So here are some costs that we pulled out. I think these are the end of 2019. Yep. And it shows the costs in the Kansas City area of homemaker services, a home health aide, adult day health care, assisted living facility care, and nursing facility care. So I'll bring up this point that for nursing facility care, it's with COVID, it's become a challenge. And unfortunately, we've all seen the news on what's happened with long-term care facilities, particularly nursing facilities because of COVID, and it's tragic. It is very, very tragic. But I think a lot of people are rethinking about getting care in a nursing facility in the future, even though we have the vaccine and things should hopefully get back to 100% normal, not into the near distant future. But I talk about that because as we talk about the continuum of care, most people are deciding to get care in their own home. And you'll see why as we go through the next slides, why that's so vitally important and the control that you have if you do get care in your own home, and how insurance as a solution could provide and pay for those expenses in your own home. But you can see these expenses, and if you fast forward 30 years from that date, $10,000 a month for a homemaker to come in to provide care, it could be a financial burden for a lot of people. Next slide, Katie. So a long-term care illness requires primary custodial care, not skilled care. I spoke about this a couple of slides ago. Skilled care is what is administered under a care of plan, right? So if you go see your doctor and need to have surgery, you have the surgery for your knee, you have a knee replacement, and guess what? You're up and running, well, they say 3 months, but that's not true. 6 months later, right? And you're fine. Long-term care is not that. It's custodial care, meaning assistance with activities of daily living. And as I mentioned, most people prefer to get that care in their own home. Next slide, Katie. So the services you might require. This is the continuum of long-term care or extended care. First, you can get care in your own home. Then some people can get care in adult daycare. You go there for the day, get dropped off, then you come back home. Maybe some of you did that for your parents. Also, assisted living facility care. Most of these facilities are beautiful facilities that people live in, and maybe initially they don't need assistance anymore. They don't need any assistance when they get in there. But as they get older, they may need assistance and they provide care, and lots of times they provide care for people that have cognitive impairments. And that's, my grandmother was in an assisted living facility for about 4.5, 5 years, and they did a wonderful job of caring for her with her cognitive abilities being diminished. And then we talked about skilled nursing care. So again, I'll point out that most people want to receive care in their own home. Next slide. So let's look at the 5 funding options to pay for long-term care or extended care. I'm going to go over each of these in their own slides separately, but I'll mention them by name right here in the bullet points. First, Medicare, then Medicaid, then the VA, then self-funding, meaning paying out of your own pocket, and then another choice is purchasing long-term care insurance. Next slide, Katie. So let's look at Medicare. Medicare is the health insurance program for people 65 and older. Some of you, or a lot of you here on the call, may already have Medicare, and then also a Medicare supplement. And for the most part, it works very well taking care of your medically necessary doctor and hospital visits and prescription drugs. And that's what it was meant for, right? And it's great. However, in respect to covering long-term care expenses, which are custodial care in nature, we explained the differences between skilled medical necessary care and custodial care. Medicare and Medicare supplements were not designed to cover those types of expenses. I will say, however, that Medicare may cover up through 100 days some skilled nursing facility care, and my advice would be recommendation that you check with your own healthcare provider where you have, your Medicare supplement, but they'll tell you the same thing I'm telling you, not designed to cover custodial care, which is long-term care. It's meant to cover skilled care, which is medically necessary where you're expected to get better. So two separate issues here. Next slide. Medicaid. So in the state of Missouri, Medicaid is it's a federally funded program administered through the states for people who need financial assistance. So here's how it breaks down, is that if you do need financial assistance, meaning that you don't have much assets or much income, chances are that you can qualify for state assistance to pay for long-term care services. My recommendation is that if this is a situation that somebody you know is in, or you may be in, that you seek the advice of a qualified elder care law attorney to talk about what your options are. Most people do not qualify for state assistance just because they've done a good job of gathering assets and income and retiring, and that's not what the program is meant for. It's meant for those people that actually have a financial need, and there's a qualification period that you must go through. So I'll say this, that most people probably on this call would not qualify for that. The last thing I'll say about Medicaid is some people over the years have been told to transfer assets to, let's say, children to qualify for state assistance. I will highly recommend that you need to seek the advice of a qualified Medicaid, planning attorney or elder care law attorney to do that. There's some tricky parts of doing that, and most people are not really going to do that until they need care. And most states have look-back periods of 5 years where you can't transfer assets to qualify for assistance. So again, please seek the advice of an elder care law attorney for Medicaid assistance. Next slide. Talked about this. There's some asset and also income limitations. Again, as I said, and I have it there. Please seek the advice from a qualified elder care law attorney for Medicaid qualifications. All right, next slide, Katie. VA. So there are millions of people, mostly men, who are veterans, and thank you for your service, appreciate it. And in my family, there's lots of veterans. But as with Medicare, the VA was not designed to cover long-term care costs. However, there could be a situation if it's a affiliated injury from service that the VA could possibly pay for some long-term care in one of their facilities. So again, as with Medicare and Medicaid, you would want to talk to the VA and understand how their program works, but I can tell you over 30 years and knowing what happens in the long-term care planning arena, that the VA wasn't really designed to cover in-home or outside facility long-term care costs. Next slide, Katie. So here's a statement, and I promised this to you at the beginning when I went over the agenda and the bullet points. Retirees live mostly on income, not principal. A long-term care illness forces diversion of income to pay for care. This in turn could force an evasion of principal. So here's how it works. If somebody needed to spend $4,000 a month to get care in their own home, then that could force a diversion of income. It also can force a diversion of principal, where you don't have enough income coming in, then you start going into savings and or investments or selling off real estate or other investments to pay for care. I could tell you story after story over the years on how families had to spend down not only their parents' assets, but starting to pay out of their own pocket the children to pay for care. And if you're looking at $50,000+ per year for care, and somebody needs care on average, let's say 3 to 4 years, that's a lot of money. So again, we're having the conversation about, and we'll get into next, what are really the options. Next slide, Katie. So talking about your retirement portfolio, very near and dear to all of us, regardless of age. So whether you're a pre-retiree or well into retirement, you're in retirement for a reason, because you did a really good job over the years, and probably with help from financial advisors and other insurance, people to guide you, through how to save, and you did a great job, and you were able to retire or just maybe work part-time and do the things that you couldn't do when you're working full-time, and maybe traveling, the country or the world, right? You can volunteer and spend more time with your, your grandchildren, which is fabulous. However, if you do need long-term care, your retirement portfolio is now exposed to the real risk of having to pay for long-term care because you lived a long life. So again, a best thought out retirement plan could be exhausted and or chipped into by needing to spend $4,000, $5,000, $6,000, $7,000, $8,000 a month for care. Next slide, Katie. So let's talk about long-term care insurance. When we went over the ways to pay Medicare and Medicaid, we also talked about self-insuring the risk. We'll talk about that next. Let's talk about long-term care insurance. This could be an option, and I'm going to cover a slide here next couple of slides about who this insurance would be appropriate for. It may not be appropriate for everybody, but again, as we talked about before, what is your plan? There needs to be a plan in place. So this is one of the options that I'll discuss. So long-term care insurance protects your retirement portfolio. What retirement was expected to do, so you don't have to spend income and or assets to pay for long-term care. So what I like to say is that long-term care protects your retirement portfolio, and we'll go through that next. Next slide, Katie. So as promised, long-term care insurance may be appropriate. Again, may. This is not a cure-all 100% for everybody. May be appropriate for people who are between the ages of 40 to 79, income of $75,000 plus, assets of $250,000 plus, and relatively good health, also have an experience with long-term care, are married, women, generally because women live longer and they understand the need for long-term care much better than men do, sorry men, nearing retirement, business owners. There's some really good tax deductions possibly for a business purchasing long-term care insurance on the owners or key employees. And then also own cash value life insurance or annuities. We'll talk about this when we go over the specific products that are available in today's marketplace. Again, I want to state that this is not in a box, right? This is, you don't have to be that, and that, but based on the people that have purchased long-term care insurance over the years, this is the demographics that we have seen, especially if somebody has had an experience with long-term care and they understand emotionally, physically, and financially what goes into that. Next slide, Katie. So let's talk about transferring the risk, not self-insuring the risk dollar for dollar out of pocket, and meaning what it looks like to own a long-term care insurance policy. Next slide, Katie. So here's the current long-term care marketplace. I know, sorry for the text in these presentations, it comes out smaller. We'll make sure to provide a copy of this. Joe will be, Joe Yates, you'll hopefully be talking to Joe about what your plan is. But I call this the 3 paths to long-term care insurance. I can't go over every single bullet point. This is for a conversation after the fact with Joe, but I'll summarize it this way. There's 3 paths, 3 choices. One is what's been around the longest, which is called traditional or standalone long-term care insurance. You decide in advance how much monthly benefit is going to pay for care in your own home or an outside facility. You decide in advance how long that care is going to be paid for. It could be paid forever. You also decide if the monthly amount, how much they're going to pay for care inside, outside your own home, if that money will grow with an inflation protection rider built into the policy. You're also going to decide how you want to pay for the policy. Do you want to pay monthly or quarterly or semi-annually or annually? Or do you want to pay, and when we talk about the other options, upfront in a single premium or over a 5 or 10 year period? I will mention one thing about these policies. The premiums could go up. They don't go up based on you individually. They go based up on that policy that company sold in that state, and they can ask for a rate increase. There's less of these happening. There were more happening in the past. We can certainly talk to you about that offline. All right, next slide, Katie. Here are the second and third products of long-term care insurance in the marketplace today. The second one is we call hybrid long-term care. That's part of a life insurance policy. So this is why I mentioned before, if you own a current life insurance policy that has cash value and the life insurance is not as important as it was in the past, because you don't need it as much anymore, you can tax-free exchange that into one of these hybrid long-term care life insurance policies. The policy must have cash value in it, but you can pay it as a single premium. You can pay it up in 5 or 10 years. It's the same benefits as it would be with a traditional policy where you're deciding in advance of how much per month it's going to pay for how long. Do you have inflation protection? But the difference on these policies, the premiums are guaranteed to never go up. That's one. Number two, you have a guaranteed long-term care benefit as you would have in the other contract. And then third, you would have a guaranteed life insurance death benefit. So let's say, for example, you did not use it for long-term care benefits and that person passed away, it would pay a tax-free death benefit to your beneficiaries. So kind of cool, right? Guaranteed death benefit, guaranteed long-term care benefit, and guaranteed premium. These policies, however, would be more expensive than the first ones I talked about just because of how you'd be paying for those in a 5-year period, in a 10-year period, or as a single lump sum. You could pay some of these contracts annually as well. So again, another option to consider. Third is a regular life insurance policy with a long-term care rider. These policies are generally probably, I'd recommend these policies for people who are maybe a little bit younger in their 40s or 50s and they still need lots of life insurance but want some long-term care. They could build some cash value in them like the hybrid policies, but another good option, but generally for those people who are 40 to 50 years of age. The hybrid policies generally probably more for people who were in their mid to late 50s and 60s and 70s. And then the traditional policy, good for people about 40 to 65. Okay, next slide, Katie. So, in conclusion, I want to keep everybody here on time, about 30 minutes or so. And these are very important slides to discuss. So this goes back to more of the planning part of this. So with long-term care insurance, and somebody who has it, is the emotional and physical impact is mitigated. It's all about mitigation, right? All trying to get to a point where you're protecting your retirement portfolio and your assets that you built over the years from long-term care costs. And I'm not saying that people can't afford to self-insure these costs, but the best way I can explain this is looking at insuring your home and car, and if you had a business having liability. I don't think anybody here would take that on and self-insure that risk. You transfer that risk to an insurance, policy. So same thing to be true here with long-term care insurance. So paying for someone to provide care allows the family to supervise it. This is what I spoke about before. When somebody needs care, the family is always going to be involved emotionally, always. So by having long-term care insurance, the family may not have to provide the care physically. They can, right? That's our choice, right? We're going to care for our loved ones. That's our choice. However, we also know if we've been through that, the caregiver can suffer too, right? Can get ill, can get run down. See it happen many, many times. So this has a direct and positive impact on the emotional and physical well-being of the caregiver. So in turn, it makes it far more likely that the primary caregiver can keep his or her spouse home longer. This is what I spoke about earlier. Getting care in your own home. That's where people want to receive care for all the obvious reasons. We all know why we don't want to go to an outside facility. So the great news about one of the options, long-term care insurance, is that you can stay in your own home and get care and pick and choose who you want to get care from. The great thing about these policies is you can have informal caregiving, which is you can choose family members to care for you, and the policy is going to pay benefits, right? Not saying you have to do that, but it is an option. So again, we want to make sure if you are older and you have adult children, which are probably most of you are on the phone, that you have these conversations with them about what your plan is. Next slide. We're getting to the close here. Then the financial impact is mitigated, right? By providing a stream of income to pay for care, there is a reduced need to reallocate income from the portfolio, pension, or Social Security, meaning that if you need long-term care and have costs and you have the insurance is going to pay for it. Just like if you had a claim because you had fire damage in your home or you were in a car accident, right? The insurance works for those purposes, so you don't have to pay out of your own pocket. And this allows families to keep their financial obligations, because most people that I've met over the years that have done well and are in their 50s and 60s and 70s and older, you have obligations, right? And those obligations can be anywhere from real estate and rental properties, or heck, just, helping your children and or grandchildren, and or having a trust where you have financial obligations through that, trust. So here, by transferring the risk to insurance, it allows families, particularly if children need to pay for their parents' care, which I've seen that happen as well. And then the reduced risk of having to use retirement portfolio principal to pay for long-term care. Next slide, Katie. Well, I think we got to the end pretty good, and a little bit over 30 minutes. Let me just make some closing comments, then I'll turn it back over to Joe Yates, and then we'll open it up for questions. We'll answer all your questions. Some of them we may have to answer offline, which is fine as well. So here's what I like to say, is that of all the information that I shared with you, the most important part is having a plan. Having a conversation with your spouse. If you're not married, having a conversation with your children, your siblings, about if you did need long-term care now in the future, what is the plan? I know a lot of people have set up living trusts over the years. I've done it for myself and my family. And the reason we did that is because we wanted to make sure if something happened to my wife and I, we became incapacitated and or passed away prematurely, that everything we worked hard for worked like we wanted to work, right? Went to the people and our children. The same thing with planning for long-term care, except the only difference is you're still living. So if nothing else, start having that conversation with your loved ones about here's where I want to receive the care. Here's who I'd like to receive it from. And here's the resources to pay for it, which could be self-insuring the risk, or it could be transferring the risk to insurance, or it could be by some other, means as well. So with that, let me turn it back over to Joe Yates.
Great. Lots of good information there, Rich. Thank you for helping us inform our members and dive a little deeper into the long-term care conversation. So greatly appreciate you coming on today. I do have a few questions here, and if anybody else that's on here, if you have any questions, go ahead and get those in the chat box. And it looks like we have about 10 more minutes left. We'll get those answered for you as we can. And if I don't get to everybody, then I can always reach out to you individually also. So, Rich, the first question I'm seeing here is, what are the typical premiums for an individual or for a husband or for a husband and spouse to get long-term care in place?
Yep, awesome question. Thank you for asking. It's always really the first question on all these educational webinars that we do. So it's based on age. I'll start off with that. It's also based on health, because it is a long-term care insurance, like life insurance or disability insurance, is a medically underwritten insurance product, meaning that the better health that you're in, the lower your premium will be. The actual premiums, let's say for a 55-year-old couple, to pay out $6,000 per month in benefit, with a 3% inflation rider. I mentioned this before, meaning that the $6,000 per month in benefits would be guaranteed to grow by 3% or by 5% compounded inflation each year. So rule of 72 would double after about 15 years or so, and you're paying the same premium. So you're looking at, for a husband and wife, 55 years of age and relatively good health, the annual premium being about $3,500, $4,000 a year for that type of plan, which I would consider, an A type of plan. So when it gets back to deciding what your premiums are going to be, and you can pay monthly too, or you can pay by a single premium, or you can tax-free exchange cash value life insurance or annuities into a hybrid type of LTC policy that we spoke about. So maybe you don't have to spend money out of your own pocket. You can use existing resources, insurance, to pay for that and have it paid up front, or have it paid in a 5 or 10 year period. So there's different options on how to pay. And what I would highly recommend is you need to look at your own situation. You need to look at where you live, and Joe can share what the costs are for care now and in the future, and design something that fits your budget.
Yeah, good. Yeah, and I always, whenever I'm working with our members, I always say we can typically design a policy that meets your needs and fits into the budget. When it comes to long-term care planning and insurance, it's really about the design of the plan to meet the specific needs. So,
and it can be much lower premiums. It could be half of that, right? It could be. I'll just throw this out there because it's there. It has nothing to do with the state of Missouri, but in the state of Washington, they have come up with the first, I'll call it socialized long-term care plan. So what they're trying to do, and this is the point I'm getting to here, is that they're going to try to tax W-2 employees, and it provides to them a little bitty long-term care plan. And if they're a W-2 employee and they don't own long-term care insurance, you can't opt out, right? If you do own long-term care insurance, you do it. The reason I mention it is because, as Joe said, you can design a plan that covers 50% of the risk, 30% of the risk, and or 100% of the risk. And like any other type of insurance, like with car insurance, you're going to look at your deductible. The higher the deductible, the lower the premium. So same thing to be true for long-term care insurance. You've really designed it to fit your needs.
Good, thanks.
Yep.
Couple more questions here. Do you have to be healthy to be able to qualify for a long-term care insurance plan? I've heard before it's tough to qualify for.
It could be. So again, recommended that you share that health information with Joe. It could be something where somebody's a type 1 diabetic and it's not controlled, and their A1C levels are higher than 7. Yeah, it may be a challenge, but I've seen people have had heart attacks qualify for the coverage. So I would say that you share that information with Joe as your representative and insurance advisor through your credit union. But it's definitely a medically underwritten product. The last thing I'll say is that some products may have more of a simplified underwriting approach, Joe, which you know about, and that's something you can discuss. But yeah, there has to be a reasonably good health. Yeah. Good.
And to piggyback that off a little bit, typically there's not a medical exam that needs to take place for long-term care insurance, but there is a phone interview.
Correct. Most insurance carriers will require what's called a phone health interview, and it lasts anywhere from very short, 30 minutes, 45 minutes, maybe an hour if you have more health history to speak about. And generally, they'll make a decision off of that. Some insurance companies will also ask for medical records, right? Per HIPAA, you would sign for that. The insurance company would get the records direct from your medical provider, so that can happen as well.
Perfect, thanks. One more here. What is the most important part of planning for long-term care?
Great question. Have a plan. That's what I'll say. Have a plan. Have it in writing. Include it in your living trust if you have one. Include it. If you don't, then just write it down with your spouse and or your children. Your children become vitally important as we grow older. My wife and I are kind of dealing this with our parents, where they're not as healthy as they used to be. They're slowing down. My dad at almost 80, bought a motorcycle, right? So, hey, great, great for him. He's in Arizona, so more wide open roads and better weather, but heck, Dad, you're 80 and he hasn't drove one in, probably 40 years, but, we're family, right? So here, again, the most important part is have a plan, have it in writing. It may not include insurance. It may just include, hey, here's how I want to be cared for. Here's, who I like to care for me, and, all that stuff that we do with other parts of, our lives when it comes to health and it comes to, finances. Okay,
great. If you can give me a 1-minute answer on talk about self-insuring and or investing the premiums instead of
Sure thing. I've met lots of people over the years. They said, oh, I can self-insure this risk, no problem. If I needed to pay, $100,000, $150,000, $50,000, I could do it. So I'm not going to argue with that. What I will say is, does it make better sense? I'll say it this way. Is there a better way to self-insure the long-term care risk? Meaning that transferring the risk out of you self-insuring it and having an insurance company pay for it. Because I can tell you this much, if you took that premium and decided to invest it to have as much money as the insurance policy would have, it's not going to happen. It's not, right? So even if somebody guarantees a 10% return, which is not going to happen, right? So again, not that you can't self-insure, but as a better way of doing it, meaning transferring the risk out of you to an insurance company to pay for it.
Perfect. Thanks for that last answer there. So with that said, everybody, we thank you for attending today. Hopefully you received some good nuggets of information out of this. I am here for you, for our members, to help create financial peace of mind for you and your families when it comes to insurance planning. If you're already working with one of our financial advisors, then great. They can help you too and get me involved as needed. Either route you go, we're here for you. So reach out to me. The information for myself was on the last slide. I will also send out a recorded copy of this to everybody that's on the webinar today, so you have that information and can reach out to me as needed. So again, thank you, members, for being here. Rich, thank you for all the information.
Yeah, welcome.
And look forward to working with all of you.
All right, take care.
Thank you.
Bye now.